Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4for4 Football. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined today for another preview show with friend in life, the man himself, John Paulson. And Paulson, already a very busy week with so many injuries taking place.
It feels like enough has happened this season to justify like a week 6, week 7 point in the season, doesn't it?
Enough has happened, and yet not enough has happened. I still have so many questions over some offenses and defenses that we'll get to today. We know how last week went as well, where we have to discuss every game. We want to put everyone in the best position possible before they make their lineups locked in on Thursday afternoon. So let's get into it. And remember, the rankings and everything that we hint at, that we show you behind the scenes today, can all be viewed. Paulson's projections that we are constantly updating around the clock, arguing in Slack about who will do better or worse, not to mention the waiver wire column and everything else we're offering throughout the year, you can get for 25% off with the promo code YouTube. That's not a monthly cost. I would make it monthly, personally, but it's 25% off for the entire year. Promo code YouTube for everyone listening and watching at home. And we begin, Paulson, with Thursday Night Football. The Giants and the 49ers being 10.5-point favorites. The big news, of course, no Saquon Barkley in this one. Reportedly expected to miss the next 2 to 3 games. But how do you see this Giants offense faring in an impossible matchup without Barkley?
I mean, not great. Games on the road against San Francisco. I'm sure the 49ers will be a popular survivor pool pick this week without Barkley in the lineup for the Giants. I think we'll probably see, the 49ers jump out in this one. Daniel Jones probably will have more pass attempts than usual, given the running game struggles that they're likely to have. And I don't know how you feel about this backfield. Matt Breida, Gary Brightwell, I know you mentioned Eric Gray, I believe, as a possibility as well. Probably going to be some kind of committee in that Week 18 game last year. It was Brightwell as the lead back in terms of rushing, but Breida played a lot, and I think he was involved in the passing game. So it's a really good defense. I think the Giants are probably going to struggle, and maybe the 49ers kind of cruise in this one. Don't have to use McCaffrey and the passing game as much as usual.
And we've already seen the 49ers stuff opposing running backs as they were doing last year. Kyren Williams, the RB2 in week 2, yes, but he did so because of 95% of the Rams' backfield touches. That's how you get there, even if you are inefficient. It's just keep hammering those touches. For me, Eric Gray is more about what do you get based on who else your league mates are putting their fab on. That's why you just skip past Matt Breida, because if you win Matt Breida, what did you actually win on your roster? That's the point. So you just skip Matt Breida and you go to the next guy who can perhaps be the option long-term, since we already know who Matt Breida is and what he offers in this offense. And it's obviously not enough. So I instead go to the rookie, Eric Gray, only a 65th percentile athlete, as you mentioned, but 2 drops on 102 targets the last 2 years in college, and in 2022 still recorded the 10th most explosive runs of 10 plus yards of any running back in the FBS. So at least we think we have a little juice there. More importantly, I think there are 2 sneaky plays here tonight. One is Darius Slayton, because like a lot of offenses, splits are skewed given the game scripts the Giants have been on. Unfriendly game scripts, including trailing by 3 scores in the first half to Arizona, of all teams. But if you only count the first 2 quarters of week 1 and then all of last week, Slayton has run a route on 79% of Daniel Jones' dropbacks, which is 3rd on the team behind only Saquon Barkley and Darren Waller to this point. He's the wide receiver 1 for this offense. And if we think they're now going to pivot, because I think that's how NFL offenses work, you don't plug in Matt Breida and say, you are the new Saquon Barkley. You now change up the game plan altogether because you don't have Saquon Barkley. So New York's 52% pass play rate from neutral game script, 28th. I would just imagine it increases, and it now becomes a Daniel Jones-centric offense. So I think Slayton is the big winner here.
Yeah, Slayton, maybe Hodgins, maybe Waller. I think the pass attempts do increase, and Daniel Jones does run the ball quite a bit. I just would like to note that Brightwell had 11 carries in that game, week 18 last year. Matt Breida had 4. Matt Breida had 8 targets, 7 catches for 12 yards.
Matt
And,
Breida.
Gary Brightwell had 3 targets for 1 catch. So I think all 3 will probably be in the mix. And Jordan Raanan of the beat writer for the Giants said that Matt Breida would be the lead back, but I'm not so sure that he'll be getting the most carries. I mean, there's a good chance that it's Brightwell.
Where do you come in on the recent report for Elijah Mitchell getting more touches moving forward? Because we saw in week 2, Christian McCaffrey's touch share that was already 83% in week 1 increase to 100%. Literally every backfield touch for the Niners. Kyle Shanahan then came out and said that he had basically been irresponsible with McCaffrey's touches to start the year. And I'm personally in a situation where I have Mitchell on my bench and I have questions like Dalvin Cook, Breece Hall, even Kenneth Gainwell, Tank Bigsby. I can't start these guys, in my opinion. Thus, I'm just going to lean into that report and play Elijah Mitchell as an RB2 in those kind of bare teams, because I think it's going to be a game script dependent enough situation, and with Kyle Shanahan backing Mitchell, that he does get more run in this game.
The names you listed are probably fair. I think I would start Breece Hall, just given what he did in week 1 and, bad matchup last week, kind of ramping up his expectation. Certainly heading, this summer we were a little worried about McCaffrey's touch splits when Elijah Mitchell was healthy, and then that has not come to fruition at all. This is a game, though, on a short week with the Giants, and a game that the 49ers should win fairly handily, that this is a great spot for Elijah Mitchell to get 10 plus carries eventually. It may not happen in the first or second quarter, but I would think second half would be a lot of Elijah Mitchell.
Moving on to Sunday, Colts at the Ravens being 8-point favorites, and lots of questions here, including the hurricane that is supposedly coming down and could wreck some of these East Coast games. But for now, let's ignore the weather and discuss Gus Edwards, because Justice Hill injured and out for this game. The team promoted and signed Kenyon Drake and Melvin Gordon to their backfield. Where do you have Gus Edwards ranked in week 3?
I just bumped him up this morning, actually, with that Justice Hill issue. Gus did fairly well last week, had the touchdown. I have him at RB 27. The Colts were so-so against the run last year. I think Melvin Gordon and Kenyon Drake will probably be in the mix as well. They don't seem to like to use Edwards as a receiver much, so his upside's kind of capped as a 12 to 15 carry type guy, but he could get there with 70, 80 yards rushing and a touchdown this week.
And in Edwards' defense, they don't use any of their running backs.
Anyway,
they're now 31st in backfield target rate, as expected. We do Lamar Jackson. We'll play like Lamar Jackson all along. Also, it's obvious to start Zay Flowers, but I just want to hammer it home because we are seeing the Colts become one of the defenses we target for wide receivers every single week now. 4 different receivers. We've only played 2 games, Paulsons, and 4 different receivers have scored a touchdown and reached 16 PPR points against the Colts so far this year. And they're a defense we can set our watch to comfortably because they've now played zone defense in 75% of their defensive snaps in both games. And Zay Jones, that's what he's thrived against so far. 7 of 7, 48% of his targets against zone coverage for 15.7 yards per catch. So I think a nuclear game is coming. How do you see, though, on the other side of the ball, the Colts shaking out from what we believe will be Gardner Minshew starting, given that Anthony Richardson through Thursday has not practiced and is still in concussion protocol?
Yeah, I think you're going to see Gardner Minshew as the starter. You probably see a heavier pass run split, without Richardson in there carrying the ball so much. So I think that bodes well for Michael Pittman. He had 10 targets, I believe, in 3 quarters from Gardner Minshew. They were not very efficient targets, but Minshew is one of the better. He's a decent quarterback, one of the better backup quarterbacks in the league. I think he's kind of a sneaky start in 2 quarterback leagues. I have him ranked QB 19. This is a game where the Ravens are always tough to run on, so I think we'll see a lot of Zack Moss, but I don't know how effective he'll be. They'll probably have to throw a little bit more than they want to. And I think really the primary beneficiary is going to be Michael Pittman.
Completely agree. We also have some other injury news. Moving on to our next game between the Broncos and the Dolphins. For starters, I will say, I think the Broncos are creating the perfect recipe for overs early in the season because we're seeing a potent offense. Denver's offense has scored a touchdown on 36% of their drives through 2 games, the 5th highest rate. And more importantly, Russell Wilson now, his last 4 starts without Nathaniel Hackett, 21.9 fantasy points per game. Unreal. Also, to create that perfect cocktail for overs and fantasy goodness, Denver's defense, 29th in pressure rate despite blitzing at the 7th highest rate. Fresh off 35 points allowed to the Commanders as well. So we think it's just a perfect mix in this one. But on the other side of the ball is where we have questions because Jalen Waddle in the concussion protocol still on Thursday, not practicing. We don't expect to have him here. Everyone knows to obviously play Tyreek Hill. But how do you see everything else, if anything else, shaking out behind Tyreek in this game?
Well, I read your waiver wire watch, and I think you favor Braxton Berrios over River Craycraft.
Yes.
Those are a couple tough names to say if you're not used to saying them in a row. But I do think, Berrios has been the slot receiver. I think Craycraft's routes could increase more. So they're both, I think, viable dart throw types. I have them ranked as wide receiver 4-5s, so this is a game where there could be a lot of points scored and these guys could surprise. I mean, Tyreek Hill's a smash. Durham Smythe got a little bit of a bump. I took Waddle out this morning just thinking that, most players that are concussed don't play the following week. So I'm just going to, try to do that pretty consistently until, somebody's practicing or it looks like they're going to be ramped up earlier than later, because it seems like now with the new concussion protocols, they always miss at least 1 week. So that being said, I mean, I wouldn't have a lot of confidence in Berrios or Craycraft, but they are both viable flex wide receiver 4-5 type plays.
Berrios has doubled up Craycraft and routes run so far, which is why I'm higher.
Yeah, the targets are close though. Like the yardage and targets are close. So I mean, Craycraft's been a little bit more productive on his routes, but you're right. Berrios's routes have been significantly higher.
And a 48.5 point total. Again, I think this game has all the makings for an over. That's why I like them. More importantly for the Dolphins, though, we also know where it goes in their backfield now. Savon Ahmed injured, and Devon Achane will be active, but Mostert is still handled 77% of this team's backfield touches. He's the one they're hammering to. So you just keep on not questioning Mostert as a top 20 back and just keep on starting him, maybe even higher than that, honestly.
I actually have him at 8 this week.
Cool.
RB8. Sure. It's a weird week for running backs, obviously, but I have him at 8.
You say weird week, weird season. Period. Yeah.
15 plus. I would think 15 plus carries for him. Easy.
I'm still also high on Javonte Williams. We saw his touch share encouragingly increase to 74% of the team's backfield touches in week 2. The issue is that he is still obviously recovering. He's actually been targeted since the preseason on 42% of his routes run. Like, he's earning targets. But given that he's still clearly recovering from this Achilles injury, Javonte Williams is averaging 3.7 yards per touch. It's not encouraging. But if he keeps getting the usage, and now he's in a high total game, I do still think it's somewhat of a sneaky spot for him as a low-end RB2.
Yeah, Miami was 20th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs last season. That was last season. I haven't looked at their defensive knowledge seeker. It's a good report on our website, but let's just take a quick look here. Miami yielding.
They're getting nailed in the slot.
Okay, well, they're giving up 135.5 yards rushing to opposing backfields on average, and 28 yards receiving, 1.5 touchdowns. This is actually a real good spot for the Denver backs. Javonte, or as you mentioned, Javonte Williams' usage has increased here. Week 1 to week 2.
Do you have a preference, and where did you put them in your rankings between Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton? Because Jeudy wasn't limited in terms of routes run, still second on the team behind Sutton, but a lot like Terry McLaurin in week 1, we see that he's still working himself back into shape.
Yeah, I'm lower on Jeudy than the consensus of probably 10 spots. He's also got a pretty bad matchup with Cater Kohu in the slot, who's played well so far in terms of fantasy points allowed per route run. So I'm just kind of waiting to see the Jerry Jeudy we saw last year before really ranking him as a player I trust in the lineup. So as you mentioned, I mean, this Denver offense is better than expected. It's just not no players within the offense have been particularly consistent the first 2 weeks, other than Russell Wilson.
And Adam Troutman was a full-time tight end. You wouldn't know it from his egg in the box score. He did run a route, though, on 85% of dropbacks. And I genuinely, if you're desperate, and of course you're desperate because tight end has been the hellhole that it always is. We're only through 2 weeks, and no tight end matters. The Dolphins have at least allowed a league-high 15 targets to opposing tight ends. So Troutman a sneaky spot in tight end premium leagues. For the Patriots at the Jets, it's pretty simple, Paulson, because on the Patriots side of the ball, we are encouraged as expected with Rhamondre Stevenson's usage. Fully healthy from that stomach bug he had in week 1 and splitting touches with Ezekiel Elliott. He then out-carried Zeke, which is supposed to be Zeke's primary role, 15-5, and Stevenson also closed with 78% of the backfield touches. And we think that increases, especially maybe even a favorable game script. So Rhamondre Stevenson, green light, all speed ahead. For the Jets, though, not only do we have Zach Wilson dragging everyone down, he's been under pressure at a league-high rate of his dropbacks. And, of course, he's dead last to completion rate under pressure because he's Zach Wilson. We also know historically Bill Belichick has won these matchups. He's picked off Wilson 7 times, his defenses have, and his last 4 starts since 2021. So what are your thoughts on how to continue handling this Jets offense?
Well, I think Garrett Wilson, we know he's really talented. He had the 8 targets last week. He only caught 2, but 83 yards and a touchdown, caught the long touchdown pass. So he's actually in these 2 games where it's been pretty much all, except for 4 snaps with Aaron Rodgers, it's been all Zach Wilson. He has 117 yards, 7 catches, 2 touchdowns on 13 targets. He's the only Jet that I really kind of want to play. I don't want to play Breece Hall yet. But I mean, there's just nothing else going on. Like, and he's gone from, if we would have Aaron Rodgers in there, he'd be a low end wide receiver 1 every week. And now he's in that 20 to 30 range because of, this inefficient. So, 7 to 13 he's caught. So it's a Zach Wilson problem. But the good news is he's getting the vast majority of the targets and he's got the touchdowns. So he can get there. He's just going to be a fingers crossed every week. Other than that, I don't really want to start any of these other players.
And it's not even about the targets for Garrett Wilson because he's been the wide receiver 22 and 25 in these first 2 games with 1 touchdown. We need those targets to keep happening because he's catching so few of them since they're off target. And he's basically getting there only on that 1 touchdown per game. So that is my still my concern with Wilson moving forward from Wilson. And then for Dalvin Cook, where do you have him ranked? Again, don't want to start him or Breece Hall. You mentioned about Breece Hall being ramped up, and yes, long-term. I just don't know if it happens really in this game. And so that's what made me worried about either Jets running back. So how are you parsing between these 2?
Well, I think part of the issue last week was, Breece Hall wasn't effective. It was a really tough matchup. So I don't think that they were interested in giving him any more touches than what he got against the Cowboys. I think that if he can get it going against the Patriots, that they will start to feed him a little bit. So I just feel like they want to use Breece Hall more than Dalvin Cook long-term. But if he also breaks off a couple of runs like he did against the Bills, we saw what they would feed him. He had 10 carries in that game. So that's what I think they would like to do. But if the running game's not going, then they're not going to force it and have him running into a brick wall. I have him at 30, just ahead of Samaje Perine and Craig Reynolds. And then I have Dalvin Cook at 34 in that Jalen Warren, Roshan Johnson area.
For the Texans at the Jaguars, with the Jaguars being 2-score favorites, let's start with the running game because you can't get a better run out for Travis Etienne on Sunday. Jaguars being favorites also increased his share of backfield touches to 88% in week 2 because they're pissed off at Tank Bigsby for not understanding how the NFL rules work. And now he gets this Houston defense that's allowed the 8th highest rate of explosive runs, 10-yard carries. So we think Etienne is just in a smash spot, Paulson.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Zack Moss had 88 yards, 4.89 yards per carry against them last week. The Baltimore running backs weren't particularly good. They combined for 54 yards and a touchdown on 16 carries week 1. If you throw in Justice Hill, it's worse. But if you're looking at Dobbins and Gus Edwards, that's what 16 for 54 and a touchdown. But I mean, the Texans are, they struggle against the run. Zack Moss proved it last week, and Etienne's been off to a really hot start. So he's, with all this attrition at running back position, he's become one of the guys you can really count on. When I think this summer we weren't so sure that he'd be that type of back.
Zay Jones also has a Thursday, not practicing. So we know how it would work out if he doesn't play. Chris Kirk just goes to the boundary, and that's their 2 wide sets with Calvin Ridley still dominating targets. On the other side of the ball, though, it is interesting because we're seeing Nico Collins break out as a high-end wide receiver too, arguably the rest of the way. 23.5% target share, 13.5-yard depth to target. So this mass volume of targets is also coming downfield. That's what we look for in fantasy football. And more importantly, this team has no choice but to wing it out. 44 and 47 pass attempts because they are just pounded with injuries, both in the trenches and in their defense. Derek Stingley, a first-round pick, also injured his hamstring on Thursday at practice. So they just can't catch a break and continue losing the most important players and catalysts that make up that secondary. So we think, again, that Nico Collins and Tank Dell get there on volume.
Yeah, I think I tweeted it out too. CJ Stroud, I think we identified as a highly accurate player coming out of college. Derek Klassen did some charting. I mentioned it before. And so it just made me kind of bullish on Stroud long term. And so what we've got here is this team that can't run. Dameon Pierce is not breaking tackles like he was last year. His tackle rates are down, or breaking tackle rates are down. His yards after contact are down. And so they can't run the ball. They're falling behind. So as you mentioned, lots of pass attempts. And that means it's a good quarterback throwing a lot of targets, a lot of passes to Nico Collins, Tank Dell, et cetera. And I think both players are startable. I think Nico Collins certainly is more startable. He's got 20 targets in the first 2 games, a minimum of 9 in each game. So that's a nice floor from a usage standpoint. I think he's like a low-end low-end wide receiver 2 at this point. Stroud's still, kind of dicey, but in this matchup, he might actually deliver fantasy-wise.
And when you keep getting 40 pass attempts and it's predictable because there is no other way, then yes, you have to be thrown into 2 quarterback and super flex options. And that's kind of the issue with Dameon Pierce right now is, yes, his share of backfield touches increased last week, but Singletary is still sprinkled in, and they don't have any running lanes. There is no chance for Dameon Pierce to be successful in this offense. So I still have him personally as just an RB3 rest of season until we get something else.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's good. And we like to bet on players like that, but the offensive line's so bad. And until he, and there's a chance that it was bad last year too. I mean, but his tackle breaking metrics were great. Yards after contact metrics were great. He was overcoming it, and he's not overcoming it this year. And that's part of the issue with his volume, his rushing totals right now.
Titans at the Browns being 3.5-point favorites. And the question of the day, of course, is after Jerome Ford out-touched Pierre Strong 18-2 off the bench, and the team signed Kareem Hunt, who's expected to be active on Sunday, given that he knows the playbook already. Where do you have Jerome Ford in your rankings?
Yeah, so this is a situation where it's a volume play for him. It's a terrible matchup against the Titans. I mean, it's really bad. So I have him as a low-end running back 2. I think you could count on him for, 10 or 12 carries, but they might, if they're smart, they might just abandon the run and just wing it against this really shaky Titans secondary. I'm thinking Deshaun Watson goes over his yardage totals at the different various books. He's been, he's been bad.
Mhm.
Last year has carried over. He's fantasy wise, he's running and got the rushing touchdown, I think, week 1. He's doing okay from that standpoint, but from a real world standpoint, he's not delivering what we were expecting or what a lot of us were expecting. I don't think I was expecting it, but just trying to get back to that Deshaun Watson of old, it hasn't not happened. But this is a spot where I would expect them to go pass heavy, especially losing Chubb. Like, this gives them a valid excuse not to pound, Chubb 20 times. Use Ford here and there, throw the ball a lot, use them in the passing game. So I think for that reason, I have him below Najee Harris and Javonte Williams this week as a running back 2. I think long term, and I wonder what you think about this too. I think Ford is probably the starter. They mentioned that already, but like, even with Hunt in the mix, Ford, I think they favor Ford. They chose Ford over Hunt this summer. He's been the RB2 the entire time. They have confidence in him. We heard that throughout the offseason. So I think they continue with him as the starter, and then Hunt is like the pure backup, change of pace guy.
As I explained to the waiver column and to everyone who was also worried in my waivers chat every Tuesday, 5 p.m. Eastern in the Discord, shameless plug, we already saw them pick Jerome Ford over Kareem Hunt. And they had enough confidence in that to leave Kareem Hunt on the streets for 2 games until they had no choice but to sign him. Sometimes the math is that simple. So I do not worry about Kareem Hunt outside of him being a contingency option. He averaged 8.5 touches per game behind Nick Chubb last year. I think that's probably going to be his role in this spot. Either way, though, against the Titans, at least short term, not a good matchup. Also for Jerome Ford, the run out is not great because we have a tough matchup against the Titans. We have the Colts that we explained have become a pass funnel. And then we have the 49ers after their bye. Not a great start for Ford's outlook. At the same time, though, like you said, and every touch back that we still consider a low end to fringe RB1 based on the offense and the opportunity he is in. More importantly, I also think it is, like you, the litmus test for Deshaun Watson. No more excuses. This is literally it. You can say that it was heavy rain with Joe Burrow in week 1. Neither quarterback could keep the ball in their hands. That's fine. You can say it was the Steelers' home opener on prime time, and they lost the heart and soul of their offense, Nick Chubb, in the first half. That's fine. But now, Titans defense allowing 300-yard passers in back-to-back games as a clear pass funnel because you can't run on them. This is it. And more importantly, the ball is only going 2 directions. Amari Cooper has a 25% target share, and Elijah Moore has a 23% target share. So we also know exactly where Deshaun Watson likes to throw. So if that's it, a condensed target tree against a pass funnel defense, we know who is going to break out if this game goes over the total.
Yeah, and I might throw in David Njoku there as a peripheral guy who might, at a really bad position, tough one to sort of gauge. I mean, I think he's worthy of a dart throw this week, given how many pass attempts that Watson should have. He's got, as you mentioned, he's only got 7 targets compared to 17 for Cooper, 16 for Moore, but he is 3rd on the team with 7 targets. So at least there's that.
I'm in so many hell spots where I have David Njoku, Hunter Henry, Luke Musgrave, Durham Smythe, and I'm like, all of you are the same. Just go out there.
Hey, no, you should be happy of Hunter Henry. He was one of your guys in the offseason, and he is.
But when we're talking about like playing the best matchup, because
I know
we're all still trying to do that. Like this week, obviously, Mac Jones is not throwing 40 times again against the Jets. They're not going to need to. But you're right. I still like Hunter Henry.
I'm going to still roll Henry out there, I think. I don't know.
That's fair.
He's like tight end 2 on the season. You might as well do it.
Well, let's get to another tight end because Falcons at the Lions could be hot. There are so many defensive injuries and enough questions on both sides of the ball where maybe we get some potency from both sides. For the Lions to lose Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who had that pick 6 50-yarder against the Chiefs in week 1, not to mention that they added all this cap space we talked about on last week's preview show, but they still have just 1 sack. They're still the Lions struggling to create any amount of pressure and get there on defense. And if we think they're going to push as 3.5-point favorites at home, then we even saw Desmond Ridder at least be spicy. Still not good at all on film, but for fantasy, for the game we're playing, 10 carries for 39 yards and a touchdown. Also over 30 pass attempts. That's what we want. That's how we stream a guy in a good spot indoors. So let's start with the Falcons offense and Kyle Pitts. How do you have this passing game ranked?
Watching Ritter last week, he had one interception and then he had two other really bad throws that should have been picked off. So from a real world standpoint, I don't know if he's the answer there for the Falcons, but he does run. He does throw enough. He has enough good passes and good, accurate throws to move the ball. He did well with Drake London last week. This is the Lions. I was actually, flipping over to see the over under and was surprised that it was, 46 seems a little bit low to me, but
I think it may be tepid in Vegas because of Amon-Ra St. Brown's injury. I think we're still kind of waiting to make sure he's at full health, around on 74% of dropbacks. And when he suffered that toe injury in the third quarter, just one catch for 5 yards after that.
Yeah, he did practice today in some fashion, so that was a good sign for him with the toe injury. I'm not trying to tell anybody to start Desmond Ritter. I think the Bijan Robinson is absolutely startable as an RB3 this week. Must start. He was excellent last week, just carving up my Packers in the running game. Algier, I think, even is a kind of a sneaky start this week given the matchup against Detroit. I think as far as pass catchers, we don't have a ton of confidence in either London or Pitts. It's probably going to be like one or the other each week that actually delivers. And, it's probably a coin flip as to which one it is, depending on which one Arthur Smith wants to favor that week. But London did look good last week. Pitts was kind of a zero. Pitts was a little bit better in week one. London was a 0 in week one. So it's just sort of, you roll them out there, you cross your fingers and you hope that in a game where the Falcons could score 3 touchdowns that one of these guys gets one of them.
I will say, if forced to choose one, I'm going back to Drake London, not only because his 4.5% target share in week one increased to 24.4% in week two, but Geno Smith passed for 328 yards against this Lions defense last week, and only 84 yards came from the slot. And that's important because Kyle Pitts has run 50% of his routes from the slot. Drake London has only run 8 routes there all year. He does not play from the slot at all. So if we think the Lions defense is one to attack on the boundary, that's where Drake London goes. So that's where I go back to as well. On the other side of the ball, let's talk about the backfield, because David Montgomery now most likely out this game, and we still think a couple weeks. And what we saw was Jahmyr Gibbs soak up 9 targets, and now on the season has 11 of 13 of their backfield targets, 85%. That's the role he plays. But everyone wants to know, Paulson, how much does his carry share increase alongside Craig Reynolds? So where do you have them projected on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, Gibbs looked really good running the ball against the Chiefs, and then last week it wasn't so good against the Seahawks. So it wasn't like he's tearing it up as a runner when he has an opportunity. He's got 14 carries for 59 yards, which isn't bad. Craig Reynolds came in and had 3 for 7 in the last 2 weeks, so he's been kind of a spot guy. I think that they will probably stick with the plan where they limit Gibbs. I think maybe Gibbs gets a few more carries and a few more series, and Reynolds is not playing as much as Montgomery was. But I think Reynolds is a viable spot start as well, RB3 type, because you're probably looking at 10 plus carries for him and maybe a catch or two, and against the Falcons in what should be a high scoring game, I think he might find the end zone.
I don't consider Reynolds a wide receiver 2, for example, over Michael Pittman. Like, we have enough questions about Ravens defense without Marcus Williams and Marlon Humphrey to say the Ravens haven't been pushed yet since they had CJ Stroud in his debut and Joe Burrow in that Bengals offense, the only offense in the league averaging less than 4 yards per play. Like, we still think the Ravens secondary is susceptible. So we don't want to put Reynolds on that wide receiver 2 par, using that as an example. But wide receiver 3, flex option every single week, absolutely, especially with so many injuries happening. As you discussed, at least 6 targets in both games now, and he has Detroit's only end zone target. He's averaging 17.8 PPR points per game. So I am still confidently trying to shove Reynolds in everywhere, even though I don't value him in that tier. Finally, Jared Goff. Where do you have him ranked in this game, given that we just don't know about the Falcons defense just yet? 3 touchdowns allowed to Jordan Love, and then in week 1 played Bryce Young and the Panthers that are unwatchable.
Yeah, I'm approaching this right now that St. Brown is going to play based on the practice report. So, I think the offense will be at full strength without David Montgomery, which might tilt them a little bit more towards the pass. Goff has 27 touchdowns in his last 10 home games. So I have him ranked 9th. I trust him more than a Deshaun Watson. I trust him more than Dak Prescott. I trust him more than Justin Fields at home in this sort of spot. We talked about it last week, heading into that game against the Seahawks. Like, was Goff's splits at home due to the defenses he's facing, or is it because he's better at home? I think partially he's better at home, but we also have a kind of a questionable defense here with the Falcons. So I think we're pretty safe that we can go roll Goff out there as a low end QB1.
I still think those splits are kind of lazy, but because I'm not calling you, just saying like everyone's leaning on that crutch whenever, like, I think we've already debunked that. But at the same time, yes, to your point, Seattle's defense has been one of the absolute worst in the league. That's a team that you can attack on the boundary. And so far, they've allowed the second most receptions on the boundary. Like, they have been bad, and Tariq Woolen got injured on Sunday. And again, we don't know about this Falcons defense just yet. So maybe we can continue leaning on the lazy crutch. One more week, Paulson. We could keep doing it here. So yes.
Yeah, but like when is their first home matchup with a good defense? That'll be the interesting test, right?
Listen, I'm trying to make it one Sunday at a time right now. I'm not thinking ahead at all. Some more questions we have are the Saints at the Packers. And let's start with the Saints offense, because right now, Jamal Williams out for the foreseeable future. And no Alvin Kamara for at least one more week. Even though if you have Kamara on your bench, you've hit the nuts, because the red carpet has been rolled out for him from week 4 on, with Williams now out of the way for the foreseeable future. At least in this game, though, Paulson, what we saw was Taysom Hill out-carried Tony Jones 3-1 until Jamal Williams got injured on Monday night. And then they literally had no other running back available, so they had to give Tony Jones 11 carries the rest of the way. Kendry Miller practicing in full, their rookie, and exposed to be active this game. So how are you viewing Tony Jones and Kendry Miller for those that are desperate?
So as far as I've heard, Kendry Miller is a full go, right? So are they looking to limit him at all? Do they approach this like it's week 1, he's fully healthy, ready to roll, and if if Kamara was out and Jamal Williams were out, and he's the number 3 running back, theoretically coming out of camp, they give him 10, 15 carries. They work in Taysom Hill. Taysom had 9 carries for 75 yards last week. Tony Jones, 12 for 34 and 2 touchdowns. I mean, that's 2.8 yards per carry. So I'm viewing this as probably a Tony Jones, Kendry Miller like split, with Taysom Hill sprinkling in here and there.
Yeah.
And then if one or the other, and it's probably going to be Kendry Miller, gets going, then they probably will see some more work in the second half and, starting to ride the hot hand. I would not feel confident about starting Tony Jones, although you can be fairly assured that he's going to see 8 to 12 touches. Kendry Miller has a wider range of outcomes. He could be anywhere from 4 or 5 touches to 15 if he really starts to get rolling. So I'm not like running out trying to start either one of these guys. They're both. I mean, Jones and Miller are both ranked in the 40s. I have them as RB4, 3-4 types. So just desperation flexes, just because we don't know what the roles are going to be now that Miller's back and Jones is not, that great.
And the way I play fantasy football, so this is personal. Maybe someone else can say, I don't like playing that way. That's okay. But like the way I play is that we kind of know who Tony Jones is. Thus, I take on that wider range of outcomes you mentioned with Kendry Miller, and I play him instead. Not as a confident option, but if I'm that desperate, and again, in a lot of these leagues where I am just picking through, everyone's going through injuries, and I say, I'm just plugging in a guy off the waiver wire. I don't care. I'm just trying to get an RB2 in my lineup. Kendry Miller's the way I go in a vacuum over Tony Jones. Miller scored a touchdown on every 13 carries in 2022 for that national championship TCU team that does not look like a national championship team this year, and had at least one 20-yard carry, a long explosive run, and 12 of 14 games before his injury. Averaged a career 6.7 yards per carry with TCU. So just a player I was higher on coming in, and at least in this one game. I think he goes back to the bench with Kamara in week 4. But at least in this one game, I don't mind starting him if I need to. I'm also high on Chris Olave, which is very obvious, I know, but when we talk about looking at splits and how players do better and better in other matchups, the Packers are another defense that are just kind of doing the same thing. The only defense in the league that have played zone coverage on 80% of their snaps in both games so far, and that was Chris Olave's calling card last year. He saw 60% of his targets against zone coverage in 2022, and he turned it into 15 yards per catch and the 5th most yards per route run of any wideout. So seems like another blow-up game for Chris Olave as well. Aaron Jones, though, moving on to the Packers injury report, did return to practice on Thursday. Christian Watson practiced on Wednesday, downgraded Thursday. That's going to come down to a Friday decision. So let's assume Aaron Jones comes back off this hamstring injury. Where would you have him ranked?
Ooh, that news was new to me. The Jones practicing today, and then Christian Watson being downgraded. So that sort of flips what I was expecting to see happen here, or what I thought was most likely going to happen this
Same
midweek.
for me.
So I would, Jones, if he's like, look, the Packers are one of the most injury conservative training staffs in the league. So when a player is actually active, I am fairly confident that they're fully healthy or as close to full health as the Packers training staff will allow. So I would have Jones fairly high this week, given the landscape at running back. I mean, after, Rhamondre Stevenson, Kyren Williams at 11 and 12 and half PPR, ranks, I have Swift, Moss, James Cook, Isiah Pacheco, Brian Robinson. I mean, these are not super confident, fantastic players. Swift, I think we could have some confidence in, but it's a bad matchup against the Bucks. I think Jones would probably be ranked as a mid-range to high-end RB2 based on his practice participation tomorrow and how he's listed. If he's a full go and not questionable, but I have a feeling he'll be questionable and then play through the hamstring injury. They might limit him a bit because of the hamstring, and they feel like they have AJ Dillon and he can carry the load, and just kind of sprinkle in Jones in maybe a 10 to 12 touch role. That makes it a little dicier because you'd like he's already a lower touch, high efficiency guy, and if you're cutting back, you might end up with a really bad game where he's got 10 carries for 50 yards and 1 catch for 6 yards or something like that.
And I continue to be high on Jaden Reed, who has now either led the team or tied for the team lead in target share in both games. Jordan Love, before we move on, because I think there are a lot of questions, and I know you and I are going to disagree here, so I'm not trying to fight. I'm soft nowadays. I'm trying to be gentle early in the season. How do you view Jordan Love? Because I think a lot of people probably have a question of Jordan Love or Jared Goff. Jordan Love or this other guy in a bad situation.
If you're talking rest of season,
this week,
this week, I don't think Goff and Love are close this week. I think Goff is, him playing at home with all his weapons and he's more trustworthy at this point. I think this is just, as a Packer fan, I'm encouraged by the first 2 games. Jordan Love, he is the fantasy QB2, I think, through 2 weeks of the 6 touchdowns. I know there's some advanced metrics they're starting to question his accuracy. To me, just watching him, he's very poised. He's calm. That I like. He doesn't look rattled at all. They kind of gave away the game against Atlanta. I don't think it was his fault, although he had chances to sort of make it happen and take the win. But they put him in a bad position. Some of the play calling was poor and whatnot. But I'm not sure where we're going to disagree. I'm just in a wait and see mode. But I think through 2 games, I'm pretty encouraged. And he's made some really great throws. He's also missed some throws. So we'll see. I think this is a really good test this week against the Saints.
Long term, I think it's just about how much does an 11.6% touchdown rate crater. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes led the league with 6.3% last year. So it's just a matter of how much this thing get dragged down. That's kind of what we're looking at long term. But
yeah, yes. I mean, that's certainly going to happen. But he's also playing without Christian Watson, who is a game changer for this offense. Last week, he played without Aaron Jones, who's one of the best pass-catching running backs in the league. So he's kind of shorthanded as well. So I think, the completion rate's low. It's 55% or something like that. Sure. I think that's going to come up, but that touchdown rate is going to definitely drop. I mean, that's the one sure thing in life is touchdown regression.
QB2, as you mentioned, this week. check out the rankings for 4.com as you continue to update them. For the Bills at the Commanders, something else I might be springing on you is that James Cook was downgraded and did not practice on Thursday. And this then leaves everyone scrambling to ask, who is the option between Damian Harris and Latavius Murray?
Yeah, now I want to go pick up Latavius Murray in my leagues as we discuss this. No, Murray has been in, I think, before Damian Harris. He's got more touches, I believe, than Damian Harris. Pulling up the running back by committee report, he had the touchdown before Damian Harris did last week. I guess they're pretty close through 2 weeks. They both have eight carries. Damian Harris has 36 yards. Latavius Murray has 30. Snap percentage favors Latavius Murray. Targets favor Latavius Murray. So I think I would lean that way if you're looking at one of these guys just to roll out there.
We've also seen Latavius Murray be used in the 2-minute drill in week 1. They have been splitting touches behind James Cook. Cook, of course, does not have a single carry inside the 5-yard line, not just this year, but for his career still to date. So that's the role they still have. But if you're asking like who has the most upside, it is probably Murray, because they've at least had confidence to use him in that pass catching role. Although I do think the actual touch share in a game without Cook will be split for them. Also, no Dawson Knox for anyone listening at practice through Thursday, which likely means Dalton Kincaid being an every down tight end since they've literally mirrored each other in routes to date. Easy to know to play Kincaid if Knox is ultimately out. On the other side of the ball, though, Paulson, it's been tough with the Commanders because the Eric Bieniemy target tree is a lot like the Chiefs target tree. Terry McLaurin, 17% target share. No, Jahan Dotson, 17%. Terry McLaurin, 14%. And honestly, we just can't get anyone there consistently if these targets continue being dispersed to everyone, Brian Robinson included.
Yeah, it's an interesting note there because you're bringing Bieniemy over from Kansas City, and you have this spread out situation in terms of the targets, and you'd really like to see this concentrated with McLaurin, Dotson, maybe Curtis Samuel, and Logan Thomas, and that's it. But we're getting some other targets. Diami Brown had some targets, so I think these guys' ceilings are going to be a little bit capped. I think the nice thing is that Sam Howell looks like he's fully capable of, running this offense and being a productive fantasy quarterback and being a productive real world quarterback. So that's a good sign. But as you mentioned, I think the targets are a little bit worrisome through 2 games to see McLaurin and Dotson where they're at.
And for the Commanders, we have to continue starting Brian Robinson. Now we have a 10-game sample without J.D. McKissic dating back to last year, and Robinson has averaged 19.8 touches. And since Gibson fumbled in the first quarter, in the second quarter of week 1, Robinson has touched him 35-5. We still have question about Buffalo defending running backs without Matt Milano too, since they've allowed 6 catches per game to both the inefficient Jets and Raiders backfield. So seems like Brian Robinson is actually becoming matchup proof at this point. And hopefully he continues holding off Antonio Gibson. For the Chargers at the Vikings, let's start with the quote-unquote big news, I guess. And that is the Rams sending a 2026 pick when the world will already be melted and nothing will matter to the Vikings in exchange for Cam Akers to come over and play with nepotism under Kevin O'Connell. Saw 2 weeks of Alexander Madison, said, okay, we're done with this. So long term, how do you think this backfield fares? Because I think that's what everyone's asking is, who do I have now and where do we view them?
I don't think it's 2 weeks of Alexander Madison, we're done with this vibe. I think they saw an opportunity to make their running back room better, maybe light some fire under Madison and give themselves another option. I am an Alexander Madison apologist. They have offensive line issues. They've had 2 bad matchups. He had the fumble. The first game he did fine. He was RB 18 for the week. I mean, it's not anything special, but he had a reception touchdown as well. So did okay. The Chargers are not a great matchup running the ball as they were last year. So I'm a little concerned that we might see another sort of inefficient week from Madison. I don't think Akers comes jumps off the plane and handles the ball 10 times. It's possible. I don't think that Akers comes in and, wins this job outright. He looked bad week 1 as well against the Seahawks. So, I'm giving this another week or two to see how it sort of shakes out. I think what they want to do is have I wonder if this is more of a reflection on Ty Chandler, who I know you were high on in terms of the number 1 attrition ad or contingency ad.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I don't think this sky is falling necessarily for Madison managers. I think that, they said all off season that they like him as a 3-down back. They came out and said he's still the starter. Obviously it's not a vote of confidence for him, but at the same time, I don't think the world's ending for him either. I think he still continues to see the lead back touches in this offense.
This backfield has 1 10-yard touch, and it was Ty Chandler's 18-yard catch in week 1. Like, they just have nothing. And in terms of this game, at least, we know how they're going to play because both Tua and Ryan Tannehill reached 21 fantasy points against this Chargers defense. And Tannehill did score a rushing touchdown, but he completed 83% of his passes on Sunday. The Chargers, as you mentioned, have become a pass funnel now. 25% of the passes they faced have gone for 15-plus yards. So why would the Vikings ever run the ball in this situation when they can have success through the air like everyone else so far? So, yeah, I think it's just another passing game for these two. Jordan Addison is basically getting the run out we thought, where he has played behind KJ Osborne in both games, but because he's Jordan Addison and good at football, he scored a touchdown in both games. Where do you have him ranked? Because he's one of those annoying players where the usage isn't there, but also like he's good enough and getting enough usage to where he makes do on it. And like, I don't know where to slot him in as like a wide receiver 3 or flex.
Yeah, I have him high relative to consensus. I have him at wide receiver 29. You can't like fault him for being so efficient in his role. And we also think that as the season wears on, he's going to play more and more. So that, that could start happening as soon as this week, but this is also going to be a high scoring, pass friendly game. So the chances of him, finding the end zone for a 3rd straight week are actually fairly high, I think. So I think you're looking at, maybe Christian Kirk, I have him at 30. Maybe you move him ahead if Zay Jones is out. But I think I'd rather start Jordan Addison over Terry McLaurin due to the matchup against Buffalo and the target issues that Washington is experiencing. DeAndre Hopkins, kind of, high target, low efficiency guy right now. Drake London, we're not 100% sure about his role in the offense. I mean, I think Addison in the dome against the Chargers is a pretty solid wide receiver 3 start this week.
On the other side of the ball, also interesting because we know how the Vikings are going to play the Chargers. Brian Flores now through 2 games has played 2 total snaps of man coverage. Even last week on Thursday night against the Eagles, he's kept the safeties high and DeAndre Swift was punching them in the face for 6 yards per carry and Flores didn't budge at all. He said, I'm still going to only play zone, keep the safeties back, and I'm going to blitz your face off, as the Vikings have been 1st and 2nd in rate of their blitzes in the first 2 games. And we've seen Kellen Moore change his offenses now in back-to-back games as you don't have to eat a sock live for everyone. Of course, they had 40 carries in week 1. They threw the ball 40 times, 70% pass play rate from neutral game script in week 2. And so I think, Paulson, the pendulum comes back. Not to say like you're benching Keenan Allen or Mike Williams. You're obviously playing both players. But I think it's a game the pendulum comes back and we get Josh Kelly punching it in the Vikings' face this time.
Yeah, I think, people were expecting Kelly to do a little bit better last week, but, the matchup was terrible. You just had to be sort of safe, careful with when you're facing pass funnels. And this is looking more like maybe a run funnel with the way that DeAndre Swift ran on them. Rashad White didn't have much success in week 1, but 4.77 yards per carry allowed to opposing running backs. I think this is a Kelly bounce back game. If you have Kelly and Eckler looks like he's still out, right? So, I think Kelly is a solid RB2 this week.
I consider Kelly closer to Jerome Ford, if not ahead of him in this game, given the opposite spectrums of their matchups. That's how I view Kelly in week 3.
I have him at 18. I have Kelly at 18. I have Ford at 24. So I think in essence we agree. Maybe I'm a little high on Kelly relative to you.
For the Panthers and the Seahawks, the big news is Bryce Young, who say what you want. Maybe it's coaching, maybe it's Bryce Young, who knows? But that Panthers offense, 31st in yards per play, zero juice at any position. It should be a good matchup given that the Seahawks defense just can't stop anyone. But at the same time, even with Andy Dalton most likely under center in this game, I just don't know where I would even play anyone. Hayden Hurst, I guess. But other than that, like Paulson, what are you doing with this Panthers offense from Dalton?
It's not great. Seattle is a good matchup. I think Miles Sanders has some appeal as a 15, 17 touch type back. Hayden Hurst, certainly. I mean, Seattle's been bad against the tight end position. He could be okay. I mean, you look at CJ Stroud versus Bryce Young and, just what a couple of weapons will do for you, with Nico Collins, Tank Dell, just comparing that to Adam Thielen, Jonathan Mingo. I don't know. It's just two different scenarios right now. And I think Stroud's probably a little bit better of a passer as well. So, I mean, this Carolina offense, it's really tough to get behind anything. How often are they going to be in red zone? How many touchdowns are they going to score this year? It's really tough to see a lot of upside here.
You are continuing to start Miles Sanders as a low-end RB2 if you have him, but it's one of those players, again, that we don't have any confidence in, especially because he's still at least getting he's seen at least four targets in both games. So you're just starting him if you have him. On the other side of the ball, though, at least it's more concentrated because Charbonnet got a few more touches for Seattle's backfield in week 2, but Walker still handled 72% of their backfield touches in back-to-back games now, and his share of running back carries actually increased from the season opener to week 2. Also, the Panthers, no J.C. Horn for the foreseeable future, and just lost Shaq Thompson for the rest of the year. So the Panthers are also a defense that we just have all the confidence in the world with our offenses against.
Yeah, from our defensive knowledge seeker report against the running back position there, and this is including Tony Jones and Jamal Williams, but they've given up 4 rushing touchdowns in 2 games to opposing running backs, averaging 97 yards per backfield per game and 4.2 yards per carry. So this is a good one to attack, and that's why Walker is ranked as like a mid-range RB1 this week.
The Chiefs hosting the disastrous Bears. And let's start on the Chiefs side because no Kadarius Toney through practice as of Thursday. And everyone wants to know, where do we pivot to? And I don't think you pivot anywhere. I think you just hold your ground and say Patrick Mahomes from Travis Kelce because, what the hell is this target tree? Sky Moore, 7 targets through 2 games. Isiah Pacheco, just 1 fewer target with 6. Justin Watson, more targets than any receiver outside of Kadarius Toney with 9. Rashee Rice, even after he was their best receiver in week 1, he got scaled back to only 7 routes in week 2. They actually took away his role. So you just don't do anything, in my opinion.
The only thing you could do is that, Moore had the touchdown last week. He's getting the snaps. If Tony's out, you can tell yourself a story and, slot him into your flex if you're really desperate because, it's the Chiefs and somebody's going to catch a touchdown. But I think that might, be the only thing that will clear up this target tree is a couple of injuries so that they're not playing, 7 receivers consistently on a weekly basis. Maybe if a couple are injured, we can get it down to 4 or 5 and actually have a chance to maybe hit on somebody as a dart throw. The one guy that is, kind of appealing to me is Sky Moore, but, with Kelce back, it's just going to be such a tight end, centric offense. Looking at Sky Moore, how he didn't do anything in 80-something% of the snaps with Kelce out in week 1, and then turning around and having a game, a fantasy game, makes me feel like he's the one guy I would take a shot on. Watson probably just from a process standpoint, due to all the snaps and targets he's seeing relative to everyone else, is maybe the next best play. But it's tough. It's tough out there in the KC wide receiver land.
I don't even disagree. It's just so ugly. And Patrick Mahomes now get this matchup where both Jordan Love and Baker Mayfield average over 9 yards per attempt. Chicago lost their DC, Allen Williams as well. So we think it's an amazing matchup also just because he's Patrick Mahomes, but at the same time, just no one confidently outside of Kelce to play with him. On the other side of the ball, how are you viewing Justin Fields? Because we are still just the carries away, which is his natural playing style. We're that away from him hitting his ceiling. Like, I had people asking me in my waivers chat about trading Justin Fields, and I said no, because this same coaching staff saw what happened when they tried to make him a passer and then changed their tune, and that's how he became a top 5 quarterback in his last 7 starts. That same thing is happening because we're getting 33 pass attempts per game after last year's 22 pass attempts. We are getting the volume through the air. He just has to sprinkle in the carries. And if he's naturally that kind of player, I imagine they will come. But do you foresee them coming in this matchup?
The Justin Fields is really a tough situation because he's quarterback 21 through 2 weeks. He's scored 14.5, 14.7 in the 2 weeks. We know he has like immense upside if he just takes off and runs. So if some of these pass attempts are that I don't know if he's overthinking or he's being told you have to throw the ball. If some of these, after his diatribe to the press, he says he's decided I'm going to start playing my way and just going off script, then that would be really good for his fantasy floor. I think this is a tough spot against Kansas City, whose defense has been pretty good. They'd limited Trevor Lawrence last week pretty well. Goff had a pretty good game in week 1. But, the Chiefs might put the Bears in a tough spot where they're dropping back every time, and they have ways to sort of limit his rushing. That would make things very difficult for Justin Fields if he's, broadcasting that he's going to run the ball more and the Chiefs are prepared for it. If the Chiefs are preparing for what we've seen so far from Fields, which is a lot more passing, a lot less rushing, then he might be able to sneak up on them. But the fact that he went out and said, I'm going to start playing the way I know how, I think, tips off the KC defense. So that's worrisome to me. I don't have him as high as everybody else does this week. I have him around QB 13, QB 12. He could definitely have a QB1 overall week if he gets it going and they have to throw a ton. He gets 80 yards or a couple touchdowns or something like that. But he's also somebody that hasn't played well so far. The team is a mess right now. The franchise seems like it's a mess. And, how well do they come out and play? How many even offensive points do they even score in this game?
Also, encouraging sign for the Bears backfield as a whole that they started healthy scratching Deontay Foreman, because now it's a 2-headed committee, no longer 3. Yeah. And because of that, both Khalil Herbert, whose touch share increased from 40% to 57% in week 2, also Roschon Johnson, 2-headed committee, touch share increased from 37% to 43%. So short term, Herbert still leading the team in touches. You can definitely use him. I know we may disagree on this. I still think Roschon Johnson is the player to roster as the long-term bet, but either way, great news for both of them since it is only between 2 players now.
I think, this game is not one that's likely to be competitive for all that long. We'll see. Mm-hmm. I mean, sometimes, the Chiefs surprise us with a slow start, but this is one where I think I would start Roschon Johnson over Khalil Herbert due to his role in the passing game. And go ahead.
Roschon or Elijah Mitchell?
I would still go Roschon.
Interesting. Okay. I think that's on. I think
due to the receptions, because I think, the passing game is more important, and we're still sort of betting on what might happen with Elijah Mitchell.
And Roschon, 13.3% target share through 2 games. For the Cowboys at the Cardinals, it's just tough because we still need volume for everyone to get there, and we just haven't seen the Cowboys in a competitive game. They've outscored their opponent 70-10 through 2 weeks. Michael Parsons is just crab walking after every single pressure. DeMarcus Lawrence is doing his thing against single blocking. Like, they're just destroying teams right now, and the Cardinals won't put up a fight either. So although I'm bullish on Jake Ferguson long-term, Jake Ferguson, who, again, we haven't even seen the run out for, but still leads every tight end in red zone targets with 7. It seems like another game to where I can't play Ferguson confidently because I don't think they're going to be needed through the air.
I think there's 2 players you can start confidently is Pollard and CeeDee Lamb for the Cowboys. And then after that, it's like, well, here are my tight end options. Ferguson is a, high end tight end 2, low end tight end 1. We've seen the usage. He's not playing monster snaps, but he's been seeing consistent pretty consistent targets, and he's got a pretty good quarterback throwing to him. Dak Prescott, this is a game where you could see him throwing three touchdowns, but you could also see him not throwing any, not needing to throw any. The defense scores a couple touchdowns. They get a couple touchdowns rushing. Next thing you know, he's in just handoff mode and is getting pulled from the game. So not a confident start there either. And then, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 for the Cowboys. I mean, with Brandon Cooks likely out still, Gallup didn't do anything last week. There's just nothing there on that, that front that is appealing either. So it's really Lamb, Pollard, it's maybe Ferguson, maybe Dak Prescott.
Pollard with literally double the next closest player and carries inside the 10-yard line. Just the absolute monster season coming out to go along with his 11 targets, 21.5% target share in week 2. Definitely a top 2 running back, in my opinion, moving forward in the rest of season. Will be right there next to Christian McCaffrey, especially if McCaffrey is scaled back a little bit. We will see that on Thursday night. On the other side of the ball, James Conner's still getting there on these touches every single week because they have no one else to use. Only Keontae Ingram and Amari DeMarcado playing behind him. So where do you have James Conner ranked in this nightmare spot?
Yeah, you said nightmare spot because the Cowboys defense is really good. They're giving up 3.56 yards per carry to opposing running backs. Saquon had, they've only had an average of 12.5 running back carries against them, 4 running back receptions against them. So 16.5 total touches. Doesn't leave a lot of room for Keontae Ingram to have a roll or two, a touch or two. Conner just, not a lot of confidence that even with, 17, 18 touches that he's going to do real well. So I have him as ranked as a high-end RB3, low-end RB2, like around 25. So, the nice thing is that he does have the touches. I've seen some mixed, I don't know how you feel about the Cardinals offensive line. I've seen some mixed analytics on it. Adjusted line yards is really low on them. Yards before contact per attempt is very high. Those are kind of disputing metrics. So I don't know how well they're really blocking, but Conner's doing well. But how often are they really able to just run this ball in this game if they're, I'm assuming they're going to be down 14-0, but I guess the Cardinals, we thought that they were going to lose to the Giants and be, out of that game early. We thought that they were going to lose to the Commanders and be out of that game early, and they keep hanging around. So maybe they can, feed him the ball 15, 17 times or more and stay in this game.
Either way, it's him running all the routes and getting all the touches. So that's why you just kind of keep going back to him regardless of game script, because he'll still get dump offs underneath with a route on over 80% of dropbacks through 2 weeks. Also, for 14-team leagues, I mentioned in the waiver wire column, but since we're here Thursday, I don't mind adding Jalen Tolbert if you're desperate. We don't know the extent of Brandon Cook's knee injury, but we do know he's 30, already dealing with a knee injury of September. And it was Tolbert again because these splits are all skewed given the Cowboys are just drowning their opponents. But Tolbert actually was second on the team for routes run in the first half and saw all 4 of his targets in the first half, scaled back after that with the rest of their starters through the air. So I think Tolbert, who was actually one of the better wide receivers in the entire league, 3rd round draft capital from last year, although it didn't click for him as a rookie, I do think he's kind of a sneaky pickup for deeper leagues if this injury lingers for Brandon Cooks. Moving on to Sunday Night Football, the Steelers at the Raiders. What are you doing with Najee Harris? Because now we've seen through 2 games from Kenny Pickett, everyone practically struggling except George Pickens, who caught 1 deep touchdown to get there. But Najee Harris, 49% of backfield touches, Jaylen Warren, 48%. Mike Tomlin comes out after the game and also mentions just being the natural development of Jaylen Warren, and even said himself that a player gets better with more reps. And not surprising, Jaylen Warren has gotten better and thus has earned more reps.
I think Najee Harris is kind of a sneaky start this week. I think Jaylen Warren is as well. This is just a really good matchup against the Raiders. They've yielded 25.5 rush attempts on average, 135 yards rushing on average, 8.5 receptions on average to backfields, and 43 receiving yards on average. So there's like nearly 180 yards available perhaps for the Steelers backs in this one. So I think both players are viable. I think, we're still seeing Najee as the lead back. He's got 16 carries to Jaylen Warren's 9. Now it's flipped in the passing game. 5 targets for Najee through 2 games, 12 targets for Jaylen Warren. He's got 9 catches for 78 yards on the year. So I think both players in their own ways are going to have decent games in this one.
Where do you have Pickens ranked without Deontay Johnson now, as we know, until week 7?
I have him at wide receiver 22 right now, just behind Mike Evans and Tyler Lockett. It was nice to get the one big, strong game here. It is a good matchup against Vegas, so you could argue for him to be a little bit higher. I do have like Michael Pittman ahead of him at 18, DK Metcalf at 19, but I'm not sure I would start him over those players. I think maybe you could argue Pittman. Maybe you could argue him a few spots higher, especially given the way he played last week. But, I'm expecting a little bit more Pat Freiermuth, maybe spread the ball around a little bit more against the Raiders.
For the Raiders side of the ball, it is concentrated. And Josh Jacobs has been miserable on the ground. But at least he's still getting the pass catching work. Even last week, 5 catches, 51 yards. And that's pretty much the only thing keeping him around right now. And I worry about this game against Steelers front 7. But in being the only running back, getting the only amount of touches there, you keep starting him, whatever. Through the air, it's interesting because we saw in week 1 before Jacoby Myers, who we expect to be back this game, have concussion. He led Devontae Adams with 10 targets to Adams' 9 and had their only targets inside the 10-yard line for 2 touchdowns. So if Jacoby Myers is back, we do think he kind of comes back as a wide receiver 2 or 3.
Yeah, and I don't think we'd ever get to a point where we're starting Jacoby Myers over Devontae Adams,
No.
But certainly week 1 indicated that he and Jimmy Garoppolo have a good rapport, and that was a huge game for him. I think if Myers is a full go, I've got him at 37 right now. I'm not 100% sure he's back, but it sounds like he will be. Probably bumps up a few spots, and maybe Devontae Adams falls from maybe 3 to 5 or 6 as just a guy who might not see the huge target share that he would see with Myers sidelined.
Monday Night Football, game 1, because again, the NFL doesn't enjoy our personal lives, is a fun one because the Bucs are frisky in this game. The Eagles defense, which has quietly become a pass funnel, has now pushed both Mac Jones and Kirk Cousins into 49 pass attempts over the last 2 games. And both those players finished as the QB2 in weeks 1 and 2 in fantasy because the Eagles are forcing volume through the air. And if that's the case, and it happens with the Bucs again, then we also know Baker Mayfield has seen at least 7 carries, 7 scrambles in both of his games as a high rushing floor quarterback expected to get volume through the air. So I think there actually could be some fireworks here in this game, Paulson.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Baker Mayfield, I was looking at his ranking today at 23. I think consensus is 3 or 4 spots lower than that, just with the assumption that Philadelphia's defense is very good, which they are, but they do give up passing yards. They don't give up a whole lot of rushing yards. Would you start him over Kenny Pickett or Matthew Stafford this week?
Oh, buddy, go higher. Like
Yeah.
I'd start Baker over Jordan Love and Derek Carr. Yeah.
Russell Wilson?
No. And that might be a mistake because Russell Wilson, for as much as I talk about Jordan Love, Russell Wilson's touchdown rate is also over 11. I just like his environment with a 40.5 point total. But I think that's on par. Again, because the rushing floor, the quiet one from Baker, I think that's on par where I have him ranked.
Yeah, he's got a good thing going with Mike Evans. He hasn't caught fire yet with Chris Godwin, but obviously Godwin's a great receiver. And they're going to have to throw to try to stay in this one as well, I think.
I'll call my shot and say it's Chris Godwin over Mike Evans week. How about that?
All right. Well, it'd be nice to see it because I've been starting them and just getting my 10 points from them, and that's about it.
So they've basically formed their own little poor man's target tree like the Dolphins have with
Yeah.
Tyreek and Jalen Waddle. It's all going to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, 23% and 21% of their targets. But this matchup in particular sets up better for Godwin because because he scored 27 fewer fantasy points than Evans, despite tying Evans in both red zone and end zone targets. And now we know Eagles slot cornerback Avonte Maddox out for the season. And that's important because the Eagles have already seen the second most targets to opposing slot receivers against them for 126 receiving yards per game. So I will call my shot and say I love Chris Godwin this week. On the other side of the ball, though, if we're talking about players we have faith in, no one's benching A.J. Brown anyways, but it does make sense that A.J. Brown bounces back immensely in this contest. He scored 19 fewer fantasy points than Devonta Smith, but still has 29% target share to Smith's 27%, and still has a depth of target A.J. Brown does over 14 yards. And so when you talk about just the revenge of the bounce back teammates, A.J. Brown, Chris Godwin, it seems like a great run out for those two.
Yeah, and this is the Bucs have been tough to run on. Alexander Madison had 34 yards rushing against him. Roschon Johnson had a 4 for 32, and Khalil Herbert was 7 for 35. So I guess the Bears did get rushing on him a little bit, but they only attempted 11 carries between the two of them. So they're kind of a pass funnel, the Bucs, and I think that lends itself to a bounce back game for A.J. Brown. We saw on the sideline he was talking with Jalen Hurts, very nicely and respectfully about his target share or what's going on. So I think he does have a good one. I think Devonta Smith is just a really good receiver as well. So they both should do well. And maybe we get a better game out of Dallas Goedert as well. He had 6 catches, but for only 22 yards last week after a goose egg in week 1.
If Kenneth Gainwell were to play, where do you have him and DeAndre Swift ranked?
Yeah, that's really tough. I mean, this Eagles backfield has been a committee for quite a while. Last year, we did see Miles Sanders in a fairly lead back role, 250 plus carries, I believe, or maybe it was touches. But DeAndre Swift played so well last week, looked so electric that you would think that he, at the very least, has like a 50-50 share of this backfield in week 3. I would think. But, they did come out of camp with Gainwell as the RB1 without really announcing it. And then week 1, he dominated touches. And I suppose it's, one of these questions is, whether or not Nick Sirianni believes that a player can lose his job, due to injury, or if he, gets a chance to win it back when he comes back from that injury. But I think most likely we probably see some sort of 60-40 split. I don't think Rashad Penny will be active if Gainwell is active. Boston Scott might get a few touches, but he's, I think, dinged up as well. But I think you're looking at probably 55-45, maybe leading with Swift. If Gainwell is active, it might be more than that, though. It might be 60-40. What are your thoughts?
I do not have confidence in starting Gainwell this week, even if he's healthy. But obviously that 82% of backfield touches in week 1 stays in the back of my mind. Also because we already mentioned the game plan after a couple drives was noticeable for the Eagles. Even they said, we know how to beat you now since you're not changing your scheme. And we'll just run against you. So that's why DeAndre Swift got all the carries. I don't think he got the carries because they believed in him. And so I do think he did well enough to where it's probably a timeshare moving forward. The issue is that Kenneth Gainwell also has never been in his career, it's early, but a 250 touch guy. I think that's also why he got that immense workload and then got injured in week 1 because he's not a workhorse. He's not built to be that at his size. And so what does it matter then? What if it is just a committee? So yeah, I'm a little bit higher on both of them. But the fact they had confidence in Gainwell, that means we can't go away because they've already shown they wanted to use him as a workhorse.
Yeah, and Swift's not built to be a workhorse either. I mean, for him to get 30 touches is not sustainable given his injury history. I mean, I guess it could work out, but it's not like he's this Mr. Durability either. So, I mean, I think their best bet, I think they understand this going forward, is that they work everybody in, and it's not like we're going to have a bell cow back. But week 1, that's what they had. It was Kenneth Gainwell. So it's hard to just sort of push that out of your mind.
And finally, Rams at the Bengals. And for the Rams, at least, everyone knows where the ball is going now. Puka Nacua, 39.5% target share. Tutu Atwell, 17 targets, 8 which have come in motion because they have targets purposely schemed for him. Kyren Williams running around on 80% of dropbacks. The ball is honed in. Tyler Higbee, as I mentioned, I believe is droppable given the options that are still out there. I want players running more routes and getting more targets. And unlike last year, there are players earning targets over Higbee this season for the Rams. For the Bengals, though, how would you shift Joe Burrow and T. Higgins, if at all, if it's Jake Browning under center? Jake Browning, which is an egregious by the organization, literally arguably the worst quarterback in the preseason, and they didn't care at all. They did nothing to go out and better their situation. I can't believe it.
Yeah, I mean, the Bengals are favored by 3, so if it's not Burrow, I'm sure that line changes. And I just rerun the numbers. The over-under is going to drop. And, Chase and Higgins are both going to drop in the rankings. I mean, Chase is always ranked as a wide receiver 1. Higgins usually is a wide receiver 2. They'll both probably drop 5 or 10 spots if those stats drop as much as I think they probably will with Browning at quarterback. I mean, it's bad. I mean, I don't know what their plan is with Burrow. I know he tweaked his calf. If they really do sit him, you feel maybe I don't think you feel any better about Mixon. Maybe they try to run the ball a little bit more, but you can't feel any better about this passing game.
I'm not personally playing Burrow, even if he starts. I'm getting CJ Stroud, Russell Wilson, or Baker Mayfield on waiver wires, and I'm just going that direction. You can't have any amount of faith, and maybe he outscores him, but you can't have any amount of faith in a re-aggravation. I just don't trust the situation at all.
Calf injuries are tricky too. They take a while to recover. And the Bengals they're 0-2 now, right? So season might be on life support.
And you can't
go through.
And you can't look at those touchdowns last week because, again, he re-aggravated at the end. So what happened last week doesn't even matter. That could have been him getting better, and all of a sudden he's gotten worse. So that's the only offense in the league, averaging less than 4 yards per play. They've literally, by all accounts, been the worst offense in the league. Like, how can you have any amount of faith that Burrow even goes? So I'm just playing it safer, and I'm going to these other quarterbacks who are available with better matchups. With that, an hour 22, a lot better, Paulson, than 2 hours.
Did we have any questions to answer real quick? Did you have one you want to answer?
No.
Okay.
We've been answering them throughout the show and everywhere else. So with that, Paulson, tell everyone what else you have coming out the rest of the week.
I'm just trying to stay on top of these projections with all these changes at running back. Sneaky Starts was out yesterday, and I'll be doing a Discord chat at 2 p.m. today Pacific. I guess it's 5 p.m. on the East Coast, and got another super chat with Addison at 9 a.m. Pacific on Friday. If you have some questions you want to ask, we will be there for an hour or so answering those.
DFS show, 6 p.m. Eastern Friday. Myself, TJ Hernandez, and Pat Kareem. As like this show, we were on top of Christian Kirk, Gabriel Davis, Travis Etienne, others last week. We will go back into the streets and discuss all these players everyone wants to play in DFS slates on Friday. Until then, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you next time.